he said.
I explained in another video about the oral law and how it influenced Judaism in Jesus's day. This video is going to be about the phrase the law and how it was used by Jews in the New Testament. This affects how we understand the New Testament. And I think this is particularly important because I hear Protestant Christians all the time talking about the Old Testament as though that were the law. That's not what the law was. And this is not an opinion. This is not something which is debatable or disputable. It's simply an error that people make because they don't understand Judaism, okay? Jews never referred to the whole Old Testament as the law. It simply isn't done. The law to a Jew, or at least the core of the law, is the first 5 books, the Torah. And as I explained in the other video, they developed an oral law as a fence around the Torah to protect it and to explain their obedience to the law. Now, Jews eventually parsed 613 commands out of the Torah that they felt they had to obey. Different rabbis had different counts depending on how they parsed it. The number 613 comes from a 12th century Spanish rabbi by the name of Moses Maimonides, very important in modern Judaism, so that's the count we'll go with. But the laws didn't always explain how they had to go about obeying the law. For example, the Torah says, don't do any work on the Sabbath and don't carry any burdens on the Sabbath. But it doesn't ever explain or define what a burden is. So if a Jew on the Sabbath takes off his cloak because it's hot and drapes it over his arm, has he violated the Sabbath? Is he carrying a burden? If he gets 3 loaves of bread out of his pantry and brings them to his door and hands them to a beggar at his door on the Sabbath, has he carried a burden and violated the Sabbath? They wanted definitions on these sorts of things. So these are the things that the rabbis discussed and codified and included in the Mishnah, which is part of the Talmud, as I explained in the other video. Now, the Jewish scriptures, it would be helpful if you went to a library or a bookshop and picked up a version of the Old Testament produced by the Jewish Publication Society or some other Jewish publisher. They call their Bible Tanakh. And if you pick it up and look in the table of contents, you'll get a little confused because while it has all the same books as are in the Protestant canon of the Old Testament, they're not in the same order. It'll look the same at first, but then you're going to see Isaiah, where you expect the Psalms to be, and the Psalms are going to be towards the back, and the last book is going to be Chronicles, and it's going to look funny to you, okay? So in the Jewish view of the Bible, what you're going to see is first the Torah, which is what they would call the law, and then after that you're going to see Nevi'im, which is the prophets. And after that, you'll see a section called Ketuvim, which is writings. Now, interestingly enough, when you're looking at Nevi'im, they're going to include a bunch of what we would call narrative or historical books. That would be Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. And they include these in the prophets, and they call them the former prophets. Then you'll see the latter prophets, which are Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 minor prophets. You won't find Daniel in the prophets because the Jews, while they consider Daniel a very great man, they do not consider him a prophet. Now, knowing the table of contents of Tanakh actually gives you a clue towards something else that you may or may not have noticed in the New Testament. And that is that when the Jews referred to their scriptures, they didn't say Bible or anything like that. Sometimes they used the word scriptures, which actually translated directly would mean writings. But they referred to it as the law and the prophets, or sometimes Moses and the prophets, or sometimes the law of Moses and the prophets. What they were doing was what linguists would call a synecdoche, which is you refer to a large thing by a portion of what that thing is. We do this in English when we refer to a battalion of soldiers with boots on the ground. We don't mean the boots, we mean the soldiers wearing the boots. Or when the British refer to their monarch as the crown, they don't mean the crown, they mean the queen wearing the crown. when the Jews said the law and the prophets, what they meant was the law, the prophets, and the writings. And we see this several places in the New Testament. Romans 3:21, Paul uses the phrase. Matthew 5:17, Jesus uses it, and it confuses a lot of people because they think he's saying he's not going to abolish the law. What he's actually saying is he's not going to break the scriptures. I didn't come to abolish the law or the prophets. Jesus uses the phrase in Luke 24 twice, referring to the scriptures and teaching them about himself. So whenever a Jew of that period wanted to talk about the sacred writings in general, he would say the law and the prophets. Now, concerning Paul's use of the law, saying we're not under law, we're under grace, it's quite plain that he did not mean to discourage the use of the Old Testament. In his brief body of letters in the New Testament, Paul quoted the Old Testament more than 100 times. When Paul said all scripture is breathed out by God and is profitable for various things, he was talking specifically about Old Testament scriptures. When Paul taught the Bereans, and it says they searched the scriptures daily to see if the things were so that he was saying, they were looking at Old Testament scriptures. And this is plain if you look back in Acts 17, verses 2 and 3, where it describes Paul's pattern of teaching about Jesus out of the Old Testament. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul gives an extended talk out of the book of Numbers and shows them how to use the Old Testament, ending with the observation saying, they experienced these things, but they were written down for our benefit, on whom the ends of the ages have come. So it's plain in Paul's writing that he did not mean to do away with the Old Testament. He always quoted the Old Testament as though it were fully authoritative to his audience, and it remains authoritative to this day. So what was the law that Paul was talking about? Well, you need to think about it as concentric circles. At the core, you've got the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, and then you have the Mishnah surrounding it, and then Gemara, the commentaries of the rabbis, and then stories and instruction in the culture around that, concentric circles moving outward. That whole system of law, Jews would call halakha. You might have heard in the modern environment about Islamic law, something called Sharia. Okay, halakha is the Jews' counterpart to that. It's the whole system of Jewish law. And what Paul was saying was, we're not going to apply this whole system of law to the Gentiles. They don't have to do that in order to be saved. All they have to do is be baptized and obey a bare minimum number of laws. This is explained in Acts chapter 15, the first church council, where it says they just have to refrain from adultery and idolatry and a few basic things. Nobody's sure exactly where they got that list. My best guess is that it's the Noahide laws, which are from Genesis chapter 9. Since Noah was the ancestor of everybody, these were held to apply to the Gentiles, and they committed the Gentiles to don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't steal, don't eat the flesh of a living animal, don't commit idolatry, don't blaspheme God, and you have to establish law courts. That's what righteous Gentiles were supposed to keep, and my guess is that Acts 15, that's what they were saying the Gentiles had to do. It's important that we understand that what changed after the Christ is not that the law of God went away. What changed is how we go about obeying the law of God. We don't have to follow the letter anymore. Instead, we walk in the Spirit, and we do as the Spirit tells us. And as we walk in the Spirit, we carry out what God intended for the law to produce all along. The law of God is what it always has been. The law of God is righteous, and it proceeds out of his character. And we keep the law of God when we walk in the Spirit. This is why Paul was so excited in Romans chapter 8, describing how the Spirit has freed us from the law of sin and death. Paul was excited that he could do in the Spirit what he was never able to do while he was trying to keep halakha. And he insisted that they not try to apply halakha to the Gentiles. The Gentiles didn't have to do that at all. They just had to be baptized in order to become members of the family of God. I hope that was helpful to you. There will be more. Go check in the channel to see what else is there. If you'd like me to speak to your group, my website, philweingart.net, has my contact information along with some articles and sermons that I've done. Also, you can get my books on Amazon.com. The Rabbi on the Mount, how Jesus' Judaism clarifies the Sermon on the Mount, and also He's Greater Than You Know, Essays for a Doubting Christian, both available in trade paperback and Kindle format. Hope to hear from you soon.
And suddenly we saw him.